go. Now, before we get started with the actual nationalist revolution, there has to be a couple of things that are made clear, which is that in reality, the Chinese suffered quite a bit of humiliating losses during the 1800s, starting with the Opium War and then kind of precipitating as it goes all the way through to the Boxer Rebellion. And by the end of the century, China is dominated by numerous foreign powers, specifically the British and the Japanese. So there is this movement to try to modernize China. And they're going to try to do this by combining a little bit of Confucianism and Chinese culture with kind of modern industry and some things from the West. All right. So there's this dissatisfaction with the way that the idea of Chinese self-strengthening kind of comes in, this idea of using Chinese culture with Western ideas. So in 1921, you end up getting the creation of the Chinese Communist Party. One of those founding members is a guy by the name of Mao Zedong. He's not a hugely important person at the time, but he is a founding member, and he will become an important member of the Chinese Communist Party later. Now, what draws young Chinese intellectuals to the Communist Party? Well, a couple of the main things that occur is that after the revolution that occurs in China, the Nationalist Revolution, which I'll get into in a second, the Western powers do not really give much to China. And China ends up in World War I fighting on the side of the Allies. And the expectation by the Chinese is that by being part of the Allies, they will get something out of the war. When the war's over, the Allies give what China wanted to the Japanese. And the Chinese kind of see the West as imperialistic, so they start to turn, specifically the intellectuals, start to turn towards Moscow as a model of anti-imperialism. And this is where you'll start to see the development of Chinese communism. Now, at first, the Chinese communists, which started at the University of Beijing in 1921, are really traditional Marxist-Leninists. Not Marxist, but Marxist-Leninists. And they follow that Leninist line of creating a revolution, or what some people would call non-revolutionary Marxism. In other words, they're not waiting for a revolution, but to create a revolution. Now, Mao is different. Mao takes Leninism and instead of focusing on industrial workers to create a kind of industrial utopia, which is closer to Marx, he starts thinking about the idea of creating almost a reactionary kind of like peasant society. So he starts to romanticize the peasants, and his type of Leninism, which eventually becomes known as Marxist Maoism, focuses on the peasantry. All right, so the communists end up getting some training in Moscow. They go to what is known as the Comintern, which is the Communist International, which is really a large collection of communist delegates from all over the world, originally in different places, but after the Communist Revolution in Russia, the Comintern moves to Moscow. All right, so let's look at the nationalists. Now, for the most part, the nationalists, which will be forming underneath what is known as the Kuomintang Party, is their leader. And the leader of really revolution in China is a guy by the name of Sun Yat-sen. Now, Sun Yat-sen is looking at the idea of reforming China under what he calls his three people's principles, which is rights, security, and economic prosperity. Now, Sun, who is educated outside of China in a number of different ways, has traveled quite a bit, realizes that democracy needs institutions. So to create a strong nationalist republic, you would need lots of different institutions that China doesn't have under the Confucius system. That doesn't mean that China didn't have a large bureaucracy and couldn't run a country. It just means that the idea of democracy needs different institutions. So Sun looks to nationalists around the world and also to the Soviet Union, which allows him to become kind of an umbrella figure, where both communists and nationalists come together underneath the leadership of Sun. He's actually able to keep this kind of weird truce between communists and nationalists up until his death. Now, that's annoying, sorry. So let's go through all this. So what ends up occurring is that in 1911, the nationalists were able to seize power, sort of, with the fall of the last of the Manchus. And in this, there's kind of a revolution by mistake in some ways, where the falling of the Manchu dynasty ends up creating a situation where there's no institutions ready for democracy yet, but there is no imperial power that's running the country. So what ends up happening is Sun, as well as some other nationalists, decide that there really has to be some sort of order before institutions are built. So what they decide to do is give power to a general by the name of Yuan Shikai, and Yuan is supposed to be kind of the keepsake of Chinese democracy until those institutions are put into play. Unfortunately for the Chinese, Shikai decides that he wants to create a military dictatorship. Once Shikai gets into power, he wants to create a more traditional type of government. And he really wants to kind of reinstall kind of an emperor tradition, except through the military. Now this backfires, and there are riots against Yuan, though it does take a couple of years. And eventually he has to forfeit power. And Sun comes in charge around 1919 to establish a Chinese government. Now Sun dies in 1925, and he is succeeded by a guy by the name of Zhang Jieshi, who is also known by Chiang Kai-shek. Now, this leader of the nationalists, of the Kuomintang party, Chiang Kai-shek, is going to be severely anti-communist. And he is going to look to destroy the Communist Party. And he's going to do this by trying to attack their stronghold. And in April of 1927, nationalist troops come in and to try to wipe out the headquarters of the Communist Party in Shanghai. And in doing this, they send the Communist Party into disarray. They kill thousands of communist operatives, and they send many of them fleeing. And it is in that fleeing that the communists find themselves under the leadership of Mao.